Hi, everyone. It's Nina Collins. I usually say it's Nina Collins from the Wolfer, but now I'm going to also start saying from Hello Revel. As many of you know, this week we announced that the Wolfer has merged with a West Coast events and community platform called Revel. The website is hellorevel.com. And today I thought it would be nice to do a little interview with the founders, with Lisa and Alexa. So I'm here introducing Lisa Marrone and Alexa Wahr. Alexa, do I pronounce it right when I say Wahr? Because
it's actually Wahr.
Wahr.
Like, yeah, is how we pronounce it. Technically, it's Wahr, but
it's Wahr, right? I speak German. Yeah. Did you know that?
I did not know that. That's amazing. Yeah, I've been told it means truth. I don't know if that's
it does mean true. Wahrheit is truth. Yeah. All right. So you say Wahr, Alexa Wahr. Okay. I should know that now. We've known each other for a few months. So yeah, so these are my new exciting colleagues. And I thought we would just do like a little kind of Q&A and just get to know them so that Wolfers can know who they are. And we're also going to release this as the podcast so that it will live forever and everyone can know who you are. So I think to start, why don't we do kind of a brief bio? Why don't you guys each tell us like how old you are, where you're from, you know, I don't know, your academic interests. And if you feel like inappropriate questions like, are you married? Are you straight? Do you have kids? Like, give us a little bit of a bio. Alexa, why don't you go first?
Sure. Alexa Wahr was born and raised in the Midwest, originally Ann Arbor, and then moved to Minneapolis when I was in high school. I went to Emory University for undergrad, studied finance and accounting, not that exciting. Went into investment banking for a few years, transferred over to Target, where I worked in business development and strategy, went to business school. That's where I met Lisa, and then worked for 3 years for a health insurance startup back out of Minneapolis. I'm 34. I now live in San Francisco, and I just got engaged a few weeks ago. So
yay.
That's a little bit about me.
That was super cute. Oh, and she has two parents who were doctors. Are both your parents doctors?
Correct, yeah.
And she's the youngest of 3 sisters.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Marrone. I grew up in Virginia. I'm actually sitting in my husband's bedroom at the moment because we're home for 2 weeks, but grew up in Northern Virginia. It was just me and my mom growing up, and she's one of 4 sisters. So I grew up in this really strong matriarchy. And I think the dominant lesson was that like there's no limit on what you can do just because you're a woman. My mom was a public school teacher and definitely instilled this like you will succeed at school vibe, though I really loved school and was a total math and science nerd, and went on to study economics and biology at Yale. Met Alexa at business school, where I arrived after living in New York City for 3 years, and then after business school packed up and drove across the country with my now husband to take a job at a VC firm in San Francisco. I had never lived in California before, had never worked in tech before, but a partner named David Hornick took a bet on me. And I loved working as a VC because I loved working with entrepreneurs. And then very quickly got the bug myself. And Alexa and I decided to take the leap and start Revel. About, I guess, like 6 weeks after starting the company, something like that, I got pregnant. And so ended up pitching on the Y Combinator stage while pregnant, first trimester morning sickness, and now have a 16-month-old son named Lauren.
I think Lisa told me that her and her husband had started trying a few weeks after I had picked up everything and moved across the country to start the company. And I was like, yay, this is great.
She's pregnant. This is great. Well, I just learned a couple things. First of all, also that I have not been pronouncing Lisa's last name right. So that's good to know. So it's Lisa Marrone. So now I'll remember both those things. But also, Lisa, when I started my first company, I also was pregnant. I didn't know that we had a million years ago. And also I think it's super funny that you're both really good at math and finance and science and like all the things that I was always terrible at, which I guess isn't surprising because we have different roles here. All right, so Lisa, since the concept for the company I think originally came from you, tell us how, why?
Well, so I was sitting in this venture capital firm. This was 2017 into 2018. And I was the first female investor at this firm. They've since gone on to fund Revel. So I love them dearly, but it's 2019 and I'm the first woman investor at the firm. It's ridiculous. And it's not to say that there weren't other women there. There were. All of the executive assistants were women, and by and large, they were in their 50s and 60s. And they became like my second mothers. Like they were my friends at work, much more so than my male partners. And I just started to see ageism up close and personal in a way that I hadn't yet experienced as then a 29-year-old woman. And it was that combined with the fact that people were coming in every day and pitching us on businesses to get funded, the lion's share of which were designed for millennials or Gen Z folks. And the fact that my mother at this point in time was like 60 something and doesn't look a beat over 50 and acts the same way. And so I had this deep understanding that someone in their 70s, potentially someone in their 80s, is in no way old. Maybe that used to be true, but that is not true anymore. And it didn't seem like anyone in tech circles where I was hanging out understood that. When people were talking about elder tech, I really honestly think they meant someone in their 50s and 60s. And so anyways, like started to just scratch the head and be like, why is no one realizing this? Why is no one trying to build technology or build community for women as we age? And that's when Alexa and I started talking about that kernel of an idea. And I think she was coming at it from healthcare. And this was around the time that the UK had come out with all sorts of studies about the importance of community for our long-term health. We decided, okay, like we're going to build this. No one else is going to build it. We're going to build it.
Right. There's that great classic Harvard study that I think followed people for like 25 years about community, the importance of community and health. And
exactly.
Yeah. And Alexa, how did it strike you? Like, were you thinking about another kind of startup? Did you have any hesitation? I mean, I'm sure a million people say to you guys all the time, you're two women in your 30s. Why are you running a startup for women? Initially 50 and up. Right now we've agreed together to go to 40 and up, but it must be a funny question.
Yeah, it's funny because it probably did come up really early when we were talking about the idea, but probably not as much as you might think. And maybe that was sort of ignorance on our front, which was just people build companies all the time and products that they don't use themselves, right? Especially in the healthcare field, right? Someone is starting a company to fight diabetes. They don't necessarily need to have diabetes to be able to, right, create a wonderful company and come up with technology that solves it. And so I think Lisa and I were just looking at all the amazing women we know, and we will be, right, 40s and 50s sooner rather than later.
Before you know it, as I always say.
Yeah.
So tell me, like, tell me what your vision for the platform is, and then I want to know why you brought in the Wolfer.
Oh man, the vision for the platform. So the vision of the platform really at its final state is that any woman, no matter where she is in the world, can log into Revel, join a community, potentially find other women to hang out with and share whatever activity she wants to do, no matter where in the world she's in. In my head, the example I always reach for is I want someone in McLean, Virginia, who wants to travel to Rome to be able to like message a whole slew of women in Rome and arrange her visit for, December 2020 in Rome.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that. I don't know if we've ever told you this, but that is how the Wolfer also really worked for a long time. Like if I've traveled somewhere, I always post and I meet Wolfer.
Exactly. And like we haven't been able to do that now for the past year and a half. But because Revel has swelled and accepted now members outside of the San Francisco Bay Area where we started, we have had cross-country friendships form. And now there's all of these conversations that are happening between women who have never met in person about, when will we be able to see each other face to face.
Yeah. And you didn't originally, I guess one thing I should highlight in this conversation is the way you talked about it in the beginning was as a tech company, which I think is an important thing for our members and listeners to think about. Like Lisa and Alexa, they went to Harvard Business School, they went out to San Francisco, they were like, let's start a tech company for older women. So as a lot of people in our community know, our biggest kind of roadblock was we didn't own our tech. We run Facebook. Then we went to this app that has been okay but not great, and we didn't have the money to make it better. So one of the things that's super appealing to us is that Lisa and Alexa really know what they're doing in that area, not my strength. And there's so much ability, so much promise there, so many things we can build.
Totally. And I think this ties to the vision too, because it's not lost on us that there are lots of women's organizations and communities out there. Sometimes they're really local. A lot of times they have no tech and it's just a church group or book club or, whatever. There are meetup groups, there are Facebook groups, etc. And I think we saw this opportunity to build a global community connected by technology. And that's not going to feel like a community. That would feel really impersonal if technology didn't exist to help you find the person who
Right.
shares what you're interested in, right? And that's kind of the magic, is like, how can we do this at scale in a way that feels really personal, right? Like we started Revel as just an in-person events company because at the end of the day, we wanted people to like actually make a friend that you could see in real life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if at scale we can't pull that off, like then we're kind of just another Facebook.
Yeah.
No, we can
We're
definitely do
also,
that. But oh, sorry, go ahead, Alexa.
no, I was just going to say, I think we were also very lucky in that Lisa knew the VC world and so knew how we were able to get into it, raise the funding that we needed to then build the tech platform, right? Because you really do need millions of dollars to get something like this off the floor. And so that was something that we benefited from greatly.
Yeah. We have a question from the audience, but I also want to ask a question before I forget my menopausal brain, which is that when you set out to create the community, it was really an event platform. And now already right before we met each other, you were thinking about creating this groups feature. But I want to I'd love to hear from you, your thinking about how much you want to be like Facebook or not. And then I'll go to Corinne's question.
Yep. So as stated before, right, we started Revel in 2019. We allowed our members to create and organize in-person events on the platform. We did that because it was the easiest thing for us to do technically, to be perfectly honest. And what we started seeing is that there was this strong desire for members to communicate with each other. No surprise, right? And we launched forums in early 2020 in this like very, very pieced together way. And the forums were just exploding with conversations and activity. And so we thought, okay, we know we need to build this. And we were searching for the way to do it in a way that would support our members and support events and like kind of tie nicely with the rest of the platform. And then had this aha earlier this year, which is members want to be able to converse in interest-based communities, right? And so that was the genesis of groups.
Yeah.
And yeah, like it's kind of like I think we will have all the Facebook functionality in terms of how the actual conversations happen within these groups. It's a little bit like Facebook and Meetup and Nextdoor had a baby.
Yeah, and just for our listeners so that you understand it, because we use slightly different language, when the way we're envisioning at Revel, these groups, they're essentially going to be small private communities. So we're going to have a Wolfer group on the Revel platform that will exist like the Wolfer Annex does, or like What Would Virginia Woolf does. It's just going to be a place for Wolfer conversation. And there'll be other groups. There'll be like a group on sex, and there'll be a group on, and we're going to have the amazing ability for women who we're going to call curators to create their own groups and moderate their own groups. So it's really quite ambitious. I'm super excited about it. So let's go to Corinne's question. I know Corinne, and she's awesome, although I don't agree with your question. She says, I've enjoyed looking at the range of Revel events, but one jumped out at me, finding purpose beyond motherhood, which seems so elemental to a Wolfer that it would never be a Wolfer event. Sounds like an organization culture gap to bridge, maybe. Thanks for the conversations this week. I love this question. I think in some ways, Corinne, when I started the Wolfer community, even though I had always worked as a mother, I was 46 and I was feeling that kind of depression of like getting older and worried about being irrelevant. And it was one of the reasons I started the community. Like now I'm not, you're right that now finding purpose beyond motherhood is so not an issue. But I would say when I was 46, it was a pretty big issue. But I think the larger question you're raising is really important. I mean, it's all really important, but is even more interesting, which is the culture gap. And it's certainly true. So maybe we can turn it over to Alexa and Lisa to talk about. I mean, one of the things I'm finding really interesting in this whole endeavor from just like an intellectual exercise is, you know, bringing two companies together is super fascinating. And of course, we're going to bump up against each other in funny ways sometimes. We have two completely different, founders, et cetera, cultures. So how are you guys thinking about this?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is that although maybe in language and posting and swear words and how often they're being used, there's a little bit of a culture gap. But I would say in terms of what our members are looking for within both communities, I really think that they're more similar than maybe the two groups are thinking off the bat, right? We want to talk about the hard things that are happening in our lives. We want to connect with other women who have similar interests as us and be able to support one another. And so I know from our side, we already have hosts who are meeting Wolfers and falling in love with them. And so I do think that it's going to be a smoother transition than maybe we initially think.
I have to say, I felt that right off the bat when I went onto the Revel platform. I really do think these women were all really very similar. And also, just like we have in the Wolfer community, you kind of find your people. You know instantly, even though we're a virtual community online, you know people who you don't like as much or who you really want to follow and, see in person and all that. I would say some of the culture differences, there's the age thing. So I think some revelers are a little bit unhappy about the fact that we've gone down to 40 and up, and we have to we understand that, and it's kind of a bummer. But on the other hand, we weren't willing to kind of jettison our 40 to 50 women. And from my perspective, I thought this was an interesting thing actually in getting to know Lisa and Alexa. I do think because they're in their 30s, their perspective on being 40 was different from my perspective on being 40, which is interesting, right? To me, it feels like that was kind of the beginning of getting older. You're still very young at 40, but you have crossed kind of a Rubicon of some sort. And I think for them, and maybe also coming from the West Coast, they had more of a feeling like in your 40s, you're still like working really hard and have young kids. And so that was a kind of interesting conversation. And we had to work through it for a while. In the beginning, you guys were not sure you were willing to go down to 40. We were a little bit we had to deal with it. I don't think I'd say another probably cultural difference might be the use of humor. I think in the Wolfer community, we really use humor a lot and we rely on it. It's one of the things that's made the community kind of addictive for a lot of us. But honestly, I think what I say I think one of the reasons, and actually you guys can speak to this, but I think one of the reasons Revel found us and wants to do this with us is because we bring a whole lot of voice, right? You can see that Lisa and Alexa are super smart and they've been really good about raising money and building tech, and they're super sincere and earnest about what they want to build. And they haven't focused so much yet on the voice of the whole platform. So we'll bring some of that without overwhelming people, hopefully. But why don't you, then I'll go to Patricia's question, but why don't Lisa and Alexa talk about why you wanted the Wolfer, why this works for you?
Yeah, well, so we were introduced to Nina a couple months ago by a wonderful member within our community. And I think right off the bat, we had the vibe of it would be amazing to partner with the Wolfer, right? They've got.
I actually said, you guys should buy us.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to be polite about it, but yes, Nina did write this email like a day later. We were trying to be patient. You were very impatient. And yeah, we were super excited about it because at this point in time, it was, I guess, a year into COVID. Our members had really gelled during COVID, and we were seeing some members attending like 5 events per month, and getting really excited about continuing to engage in the Revel community coming out of COVID. And there's all of this fervor about group travel and yada, yada. And so the prospect of merging with a community that was based on the East Coast, or at least originated on the East Coast and had members all across the country, felt really tantalizing. It's like, oh my gosh, we could have this nationwide sisterhood in one fell swoop. And yeah, I think Nina, it was not lost on us that you complimented us very well. So that was a huge plus. And I think the point about Revel and its brand has been mostly augmenting the stories and the voices of our own members. And so something that had been missing at Revel, of course, was the perspective of someone 40 to 50, because that hadn't been our focus. And so having really authentic conversations about perimenopause, about all the things, all of those early displacements that can happen in one's 40s, I think are really important. Because when Alexa and I had been talking about Revel since the very beginning, our whole purpose of building Revel was to help women have a crash pad during these displacements, right?
Yeah, and I think one thing our members maybe aren't so aware of is that Revel, of course, only started like a year and a half ago. So you can only do so much at once, right? They've been building this incredible tech platform, and they have a team of engineers, 5 or 6 people, and so you've accomplished a huge amount in a very short time, right? We've been around for 6 years, mostly kind of just doing what we do. So it felt right away. I mean, I think I've told you guys this before, but the listeners is that I kind of instantly, I was trying to figure out a solution, a next step for the Wolfer. But as soon as I met Alexa and Lisa, I really felt like these are future Wolfers, and it felt like a very obvious pairing. So far, I don't think we're having that many kind of culture clash issues. I think, we're talking about it honestly, and I find you both really easy to talk to and open to reconsidering things as I am. Like I want to do things.
Totally, likewise. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably the number one thing I respect in you, Nina, is that you have very strong opinions, but you also like respond to facts and are willing to bend your opinions to when you agree with somebody else, which I think is a really hard thing to do. The other thing I'll say on the culture clash thing is I remember when Alexa and I went to your apartment and we tried to do this exercise with each other of what are the 3 values that exemplify wolfers and what are 3 values that exemplify revelers. And I think the 3 words you picked were authentic, humor, and candor. Yep. And the 3 words we picked were authenticity, respect, and joy. Joy and humor, different words for different things. I think if there's a culture division between the wolfer and revel, it's this difference between candor and respect. And I think that's a totally bridgeable.
I think that's completely right. And I loved that conversation when we had it. Because even like thinking about the 2 words humor and joy, they're not far apart, but and there is a subtle difference. And I think it's totally bridgeable. That was a great exercise. And that we both value authenticity so much. And I think that's obvious in all of our conversations, and it feels really just true and great. I was always describing people right from the beginning after I met you. I was like, they're tech types, but they're not like, I shouldn't say that. I would say they're not like,
bro.
Yeah. I was like, it's different.
They went to Harvard, but they're not douchebags.
They don't sound douchebags, I promise. All right, so Patricia Chu asked, how do you plan to monetize Revel in the future? Very good question. I'll turn it over to you guys.
Alexa, you want to take it?
Sure. I think that the honest answer right now is that we're really focused on building the community and the community first. We had tested out membership fees and kind of realized that we potentially were just a little bit too early. And really the focus is getting as many members into the community, loving the community, building the features that sort of make sure people can communicate and connect and meet up as easily as possible. I think that, once we're sort of satisfied on that, it's then figuring out potentially a freemium model. Maybe it's not a membership fee that everyone has to pay the second they come in the door, but maybe it's certain types of events or certain types of features that are a little bit more elevated, have a cost associated with them. Maybe some events do, but ultimately are still testing and learning to figure out what that might be.
Yeah, and I think I can just add, because the Wolfer, we started with a $35 subscription just to kind of cover our costs, right? That was covering Sydney and our basic tech expenses. The Revel, when I first met them, were charging $90 a year, but had gotten a lot of people in for free because they had just launched. And, it's a big difference between where we were and where they are because they have VC funding. So their focus is much more on growth. So they made this decision when we paired up to go free for the first 10,000 members. I actually keep thinking maybe we should do it for like 15,000 members. We really want to grow first. And then, it'll be some sort of freemium, it'll be, maybe it's free if you use it once a month. And if you're using it 5 times a week, maybe you're paying something, some sort of model like that. And we'll also have sponsors. So there'll be some sponsorship money, but only from people, I think, but only from, companies we really, really value and think are
right. You're never going to plaster the site with ads like Facebook.
No ads.
Right. And we're not going to be in the business of selling data to third parties. Like life is short, and I don't think any of us want to do that.
No, never selling data, never selling you lots of shit. Also, I'm like Wolfers know I'm not into hawking stuff. So we're only going to be talking about very few products we like at some point. That's not even anytime soon. Nolene Murray from Africa wrote, love hearing this story. How do you imagine the international network or not? I found the Revel platform slow to load here in Africa, and I have what we think of as a good connection.
It's great feedback to hear. We are aware that our events page is slower than we'd like to load. Has to do with image size, something technical above my head. My hope is that we'll be addressing this in coming months. So I guess the plan is for speedy, fast Revel, no matter where in the world you are.
For sure. And in terms of international, one of the things I'm most excited about this collaboration is, if you guys remember when we were on Facebook, we had a lot of international groups. We had Wolfer Europe and Wolfer Asia, and we had women in all those communities. And then when we moved to the app, the whole functioning of the regional groups didn't work as well. It wasn't as intuitive. People couldn't figure out how to do it. So I think we still have a lot of international members who haven't been as activated. And I'm really excited on Revel to get them activated. I had a call this morning with a woman in Trieste, which was super cool. And so we have to, get our international friends to spread the word and build communities. And I really think that's going to happen. Now we have a comment from, sounds like someone who's an original Reveler, who says, the key to Revel for an early member has been the connection. I've made some great friends because of our platform. I loved having a place to go to that my daughters could not be part of. They'll be getting close to 40 in a few years. There is definitely an age element that worked well for 50 plus women. All things change and evolve. Of course, we will all have our own perspective. So happy to have been here for the beginning of a great concept. Loved how we have felt heard and respected, from Chris to Sassy. I totally appreciate that. And we have that issue in the Wolfer community too, Chris. I would tell you that it's really not all that much different. We have very few mother-daughter Wolfers. They exist, but most women will say, I don't want my daughters here, or I don't want my mother here. And of course, as we as Wolfers became an actual business, and not like in the early days when we were just on Facebook, people would write to me and they would say, if my daughter asks to join, can you block her? And I'd be like, sure, you're a good Wolfer, whatever. When you transition into being an actual business, that's not as easy anymore. So I do completely understand your concern. I would say to you that when we build this groups feature, you'll have a much better opportunity to really just be with your tribe. You can find the group that works for you, and you could ask that moderator to not let your daughter in, or, I think we're going to try and build in ways. It is always a problem. We used to, even when What Would Virginia Woolf grew, I would have problems where someone would write to me and say, like, eek, my child's kindergarten teacher just joined the community, and now everything I've written about my husband, she can see. What do we do? And we would have to deal with it. But we're here to solve those problems. Like, we understand them, we care. We're not, we're trying to make the best experience for you, and we will work with you to figure it out.
The other thing I'd say to
go ahead, Lisa.
The other thing I'd say to Chris, who we love, is that community and scale are in tension with each other. There's this really hard thing of, I think in the early days of Revel, we have had such a tight-knit bond because we've all known each other. We've known each other pretty intimately. And how do we preserve that and also let new members into the fold is something that's really tough. And we think that, we think that adding new members into the fold helps make new potential connections possible, new exciting events possible, and that it shouldn't change the average day-to-day feel of Revel very much, right? The platform will continue to surface incredible women to meet. The feeling at events will remain exactly as it feels. And so that's our hope.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead, Alexa.
The thing I was going to add was that I don't actually think that our demographics are that far off between the Wolfer and the Revel communities, even with the age difference coming in. I believe your average age was 56.
It's around 56. Yeah. So it's really not very different. Chris, just so you know, around a quarter of our members are between 40 and 50. And of that quarter, I'd say most of them are between 45 and 50. So we don't have that many women in the kind of 41, 42. I mean, we welcome them, we want them, but yeah, our average age is 56. The other thing I should share with you as a funny story is when we started What Would Virginia Woolf Do, and it was a closed community and it was very popular, but you couldn't find it on Facebook. It was completely secret. So you could only join if your friends invited you. And about 6 months in, it was so interesting and so funny that I announced that I wanted to change it from secret to closed on Facebook, which meant that people could find it and ask to join. And I got such pushback from the community, like beloved members who all became moderators were like, no, don't let anyone in. And my thinking was like, these women are so interesting. There must be like equally interesting women in like Oklahoma that I want to hear from. So I opened it up against everyone's wishes, and people were really angry at me. And it ended up being a really great thing. Like, we all made a million new friends. So, change is hard, but as I always say, I think change is almost always good in my personal opinion. Yeah. So, all right, well, let's see. Is there anything that we haven't covered?
I don't know, just how excited we are for all of this and really how much opportunity there is to come.
This is the end of our first official week of working together. We're all super tired. We've been working really, really hard.
And it doesn't even feel like it's been a week. It feels like it's already been ages, which I think is a good sign.
Yeah, and I've learned how to use Slack. I'm very proud of myself, and we have all these new colleagues. And Sydney and I are so excited to like have help and support and other people who are super smart and can offer a different opinion. So yeah, it's felt, and I want to thank all of you, all the Wolfers, and anyone who's listening. I feel like the support from the community has been so surprisingly wonderful. Like I knew this was a good move, but I anticipated more complicated feelings about change. And people have just, I think, really seen right away that this makes sense and that it's super exciting. So that is great. All right. Well, have a great weekend, guys.
Thank you. Have a great weekend. And thanks to everybody who's listening.
Yeah.
We're excited to meet you at some point, whether virtually or in person. And I guess there'll be more information about the groups feature and how to join us in conversation there coming soon.
Yeah, and the message is still the same for everyone in that this is a slightly slow rollout. So no one has to worry too much. Not much is going to change in the beginning. You'll be a wolfer the way you always have been. You'll be a reveler the way you always have been. And then slowly you'll start to see some design changes on the site. You'll start to see emails might look a little differently. We're looking at the frequency of emails. We're kind of looking at everything. We're very, very open to feedback. And then hopefully in the fall, we will release this groups feature, which will be very exciting. So stay tuned.